Sorry, can you live?
Right, because it was just getting hot.
So thank you for being here and being at the last session, last talk, last session. Thank you also to Munzer and to the IDSS leadership for putting together this very nice 2 days of celebration. This, if I can have where's the presenter is here. This is my heat map of presence in Cambridge and on MIT campus. And you can zoom a little more like this. And here you can see, we are here, right? Or this doesn't work, but you can see the media lab and you can see Stata over there. And this is my heat map presence over the campus over a period of about 2 years. So this is something you can easily do for yourself. So you can go to Google and ask Google to give back to you or just share with you the data that Google has about you, right? And so when you do so with this download your data archive, when you do so, then Google needs a bit of time to prepare all this because it's a few gigabytes. And after an hour or two, you get an email with a link on a location where you can download your data. And among the data that you download, there is an interesting file, and this is just an extract of it, a file that has these timestamps, latitude, longitude, accuracy, velocity, heading, and altitude. In my case, this covered over a period of about 2 years. There were about more than 100,000 locations, which meant a location every 5 minutes. So if you want to do it for yourself, it's easy. You just go to the Google website that I showed, and you can get that information. In particular, you can see that also you have altitude, which is quite useful in case you, for example, you're in Stata. From the altitude, you can infer whether you were in Munzer's office or perhaps on the ground floor having a coffee, because you can give a guess at what level on Stata Center you are. Right, so very precise information. Okay, so when you see pictures like this, and if I was to present these heat maps for some other people of the audience here or perhaps on the panel, you could say, well, okay, that's fine, I don't care, I have nothing to hide. And actually that was sort of my position. That's what I would have said a few years back. I don't really care. Until I ran for university president, and this is the heat map on the university campus of Louvain, where I ran for president. It's a university-wide election, and the heat map, of course, says on what part of the campus you've been, and so perhaps the more strong ties you have with some people. And so even though this is information I wouldn't have mind sharing, maybe a little later on, you may mind sharing. So even though your heat map today in Cambridge is not that important of you, perhaps in the future it could become more valuable to you. And similar things, of course, happens with our children, with they share on Facebook. It's okay for them to share them on Facebook now, but perhaps in the future it may be a bit less so. Another thought you may have is that, well, I'm sure that this is all safely stored with Google, Yahoo, whatever. And I was preparing this talk yesterday afternoon, and while I was preparing it, something came up on my screen. Yahoo says hackers stole data on 500 million users in 2014. This is about a tenth of the total population, 5 million. And probably most of those who in this room have a Yahoo account, it's probably in there. It seems that this data was stolen, and that data included email, birth date, and passwords. That's what I read in the newspaper this morning. And it was mostly likely stolen by a state-sponsored actor. So a state-sponsored actor has had for a couple of years 500 million data on users of Yahoo, and some of these are for sale on the web today. So you can actually buy them, right? A last thought you may have is that, well, it's okay because my account is protected. Okay, so let's see whether your account is really protected. And I thought of taking some people in the room here, but I wasn't sure since this is the last talk, last session. So the only people I was sure they would be in the room here are the people on the panel. So let's try with let's try this with the people on the panel. In order to do that, you first need, of course, their login, their Gmail login. And I didn't use any private information I had about them. I just went to the web. So for these three people here, it was pretty easy. So for the moderator, it turns out Caroline has registered at some stage, and so it has the Gmail address there. Then Alan, he just advertised his Gmail account on his webpage. And then I found a paper by Elchanan that also has a Gmail address on the paper rather than his institutional address. For David, it took me a little bit of time. I didn't find anything, and perhaps it's a Yahoo account, but that you can then find it. Okay, then from there you can get the account. Well, of course, not all the process I've described, but at least the login. You still miss something, a piece of the information. It's the password. So how do you go for the password? So I searched a little bit on the... I searched for the password. I searched for the password. That's a bit more complicated, but there are things that may help you doing this. So there are softwares on the web. There are softwares that help you crack passwords. And so I'll stop here. I didn't download the software, and I'm not sure how efficient it is, but in case I had downloaded software and I don't know how efficient it is, and I don't know how simple your passwords are, but possibly we are just a few slides away from projecting here your heat map in Cambridge and everywhere else in the world, right? So I didn't do that, and I stopped here. What I'd like to illustrate, yes. What I'd like to illustrate this is that, of course, location data may be very private. It's something that you may not want to share, and even though it may be a very easy, not that hard to access. And this location data has a lot of interest, of course, also, which I'd like just very briefly to illustrate here with a project that we run with a number of people here at MIT, including Sandy Pentland, Yves Alexandre, who is in the room here, and other colleagues, where we made available to researchers very large data sets that covered an entire country, in this case Senegal, on location information inferred from the use of mobile phone. And we challenged the scientific community to use this information to provide good use of these data sets for society and for the country. And we had lots of results, actually results that were presented here in this very room about a year ago. And let me just describe two of these. One was on trying to get not a heat map, but a population distribution estimates that you can infer from coupling satellite images and mobile phone data sets. So on the left there you have France, and that map has been produced thanks to extensive information gathering on people, whereas the one on the right is an instant map that you can get from the mobile phone activities. And so we did the same thing for similar things will be done for Africa, where in some of these countries, the country itself doesn't know how many inhabitants they have, and so getting information about the population distribution is extremely useful. Another application of mobility is, of course, to find ways of containing epidemics. About 1 million people die from malaria every year, and these malaria spreads mostly by movement of people, and so knowing where people move around is extremely useful for containing epidemics. So these are just two examples of useful things that can be done with information about location of people, and we've seen many more today, but also yesterday through these different sessions on voting, policy, financial system, social network, and so forth, and in particular also on smart cities, the very fascinating application that we saw this morning on using this data, location data, for example, in cities for congestion control, for example, and other applications. So there are so many nice applications that can be done with these big data sets of location, but other data sets in health, for example, as well. And at the same time, they are somewhat threatening, privacy threatening, and I believe that some of the members of the panel felt a little bit of a threat at some stage in this presentation. So they're very, very threatening. And so it raises question, and I'd like just to illustrate the one with one of the presentations that was given, one of the first presentation on forecasting of voting, and this is an update as of yesterday on the probability of election, and this is also a little bit scary, right? So 60% on one side and 40% on the other side. And these, in the talk on presenting these provision, there was also a description of how to influence the vote intentions of people, and with exploiting data to a point that it could be infer what door to knock on in order to convince people perhaps to change their mind. And so you had this example of skipping in a street or skipping a few houses and knocking on the next door just because by exploiting information about some very private information, it was possible to infer which was the most efficient way of increasing the probability of chances of winning on one side or the other. So this, I believe, raised questions such as the one I've heard earlier this morning on whether this really helped democracy. And we all conscious here, this, just for one example here with the voting intention, but we're all conscious here that after a first anniversary, this is the first anniversary of IDSS, if we look forward to the 10th anniversary and how data is going to change our life and society in 10 years from now, we're all very conscious that it can only increase the importance of exploiting data sets will only increase, and more will rule our lives and will rule society. That's beyond doubt. And so I believe that one of the challenges for IDSS is to take this into account in at least two aspects. One of them is that behind these data, there are people. And in most of these data sets, there are people behind them, and people who may not want to have their heat map projected in front of a large audience. So privacy should be a major concern for IDSS. And second, since this will rule, these data sets will rule more and more our lives and society, this also carries some notion of what type of society we want to live in. When we're talking about health, when we're talking about revenues, when we're talking about social contacts, these data sets are going to rule our life, and this should be also central for what the IDSS and the researchers within IDSS are going to do in the next 10 years. Let's not forget there are people behind the data, and there are models of society that are also carried by the research that are being performed. Thank you very much.